we talked, Alex, at the beginning of the year, there's a big difference between how busy and how bad. And, you know, the seasonal forecasters, they weren't too far off on the numbers. They forecast something close to an average year, and the numbers this year weren't that far from average. But again,
you get a Michael and a Florence, and everybody thinks, surely this year must have been gangbusters. Surely it must have been above average just because we had those two particularly bad storms.
And because of those two storms, and because of what the seasonal forecasts were saying at the beginning of the year, as we go 10-1 here on the show tonight, what are the lessons that I've learned from this hurricane season? Number 10, I list seasonal forecast messaging is still often misleading. And at the beginning of the year, they focused on the numbers, and they focused a lot on the cooler than average waters in the Atlantic. But we talked about at the beginning of the season how that doesn't necessarily mean all good news.
Right.
The main development region, in past years where it was quiet, where it was cooler than average, we still had a lot of activity. 1984 looked like this year, and look how busy it was with U.S. landfalls. 1985, we had multiple hurricanes hitting the U.S., and look at all these years. You know what they have in common, Alex? Except for 89?
It looks like they have impactful systems.
They do, but they don't form in the deep tropical Atlantic, but they form close to home. That cool Atlantic might not be the good news we're looking for. Now, how much do those track maps that we showed at the beginning of this hurricane season from past years with cool waters in the deep tropical Atlantic look like this year?
Like what we had.
We talked about something out of the deep tropics and something forming close to home, Michael and Florence. We found out this year that Hawaii is still vulnerable from a direct hit, even though they got off the hook from a direct impact from Lane, right?
Yeah.
We also learned this year, look at what it did. Despite not being a direct hit, there was still tremendous flooding in Hawaii. So can you imagine if this had made a direct hit on Oahu? It would have been much worse for them. So they've still got to stay vigilant for the next hurricane season. And look at that track, how close it got to the Hawaiian Islands. It has a Cat 5 just south of the Big Island, and then it fell apart due to wind shear. Yeah,
you talk about trees being a huge danger from these systems, from wind and rain. That's the next bullet point on your list.
Yeah, trees are an underrated hazard, and we saw a lot in North Carolina, in Wilmington.
Yeah, in Wilmington, there was a woman and a baby killed by a tree falling into their home.
Yeah, and when I went around driving in Panama City, so much of what we saw damage-wise was due to trees. And then also, we learned early in the season you don't even need a tropical depression to have a flooding disaster. Remember deep South Texas? Those systems that weren't even depressions, and we had terrible flooding?
Right.
So rain without a name, again, happened this year.
All right, we're going to talk about a few more of our lessons learned next hour.